I never imagined I'd feel so invisible in my own home, surrounded by people who should care. But here I am, 31 years old, Kathleen Miller, a social worker with 8 years under my belt, quietly holding the family together. I'm the one who pays the bills no one else notices, whether it's the heating during winter or the groceries for the chaotic dinners. Last Christmas, I covered the entire family feast, $450 on food, $200 on decorations. Not a single thank you crossed anyone's lips. Lois, my stepmother, often sneers that I'm too sensitive, or whispers that I'm not really part of the family. My father, Mark, just shrugs and changes the subject whenever the tension rises. I tell myself families stick together, but sometimes I feel like a ghost drifting through their lives. I try to bury the ache deep down, convincing myself this is just a passing storm. What they don't know is something I carry quietly, a secret power tucked away in a bank-safe deposit box, the original inheritance documents for Grandpa's estate. No one suspects I hold them. Not Lois, not Mark, not anyone. I've never dared to use them. Not yet. For now, they're my quiet assurance that one day, maybe things will tip in my favor. But for the moment, I remain the invisible one. Silent, sturdy, unnoticed. Memories flood back, sharp and unyielding. When I was 12, I heard words that carved deep wounds. My stepfather, Lois's husband, said plainly, "My real kids come first." The phrase felt like a slap, echoing in my chest long after. Lois's 2 sons from her previous marriage were treated like kings. New clothes, special trips, extra allowances, while I got handed old jackets and cold detachment. At family dinners, Lois would laugh and praise her boys loudly, barely sparing me a glance. My father, Mark, saw it all but never intervened. He didn't argue or defend me. He simply stayed silent, hoping to keep peace. I tried to convince myself it was tough love, or that maybe Lois just didn't know how to show affection properly, but the sting never faded. I remember one winter evening when Lois accused me of laziness right in front of her sons. I was 16, and humiliation burned like fire across my skin. No one stood up for me. That silent blow planted a seed of doubt. Was I truly part of this family? It's a question that has haunted me ever since, gnawing at my confidence and worth. In my 20s, I decided to prove my worth in ways they couldn't ignore. Over 5 years, I quietly funneled $230,000 toward the family mortgage and household bills, money earned from extra shifts, late nights, and scrunched budgets. I gave up 2 vacations, delayed buying a car, and tightened every financial corner to keep our home afloat. Daniel, my husband, noticed one evening and asked softly, "Kathleen, why do you keep giving without getting anything back?" I shrugged, clutching onto the fragile hope that someday my family would see me, not just as the stepdaughter or the silent provider, but as someone who mattered. Lois never smiled or said thank you. She treated my sacrifices like debts owed, cold and unappreciative. My father stayed passive, avoiding any confrontation, his silence as loud as a roar. The family was fully formed. Lois, the controlling ice queen. Mark, the silent enabler. Daniel, my grounding force. And my sister Lisa, caught in the middle. Yet, I held tight to hope. And the inheritance documents I kept safe in the bank, my secret promise for the future, remained untouched, waiting for a time I wasn't sure would come. The first crack appeared on what should have been a joyful night, my cousin's wedding. During the family toast, Lois let her poison spill, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. Kathleen might think she's part of this family, but at the end of the day, she's just the stepgirl who never quite fits. The room froze. Some guests looked away, others chuckled awkwardly. I felt a sudden, sharp stab in my chest, heat rushing to my face. I wanted nothing more than to vanish into the floor. The weight of her words pressed down, suffocating. I told myself she must have been stressed or didn't mean it the way it sounded. Trying to keep my dignity, I whispered, "I'm here to celebrate, Lois," then excused myself quietly from the table. For the first time, I refused to swallow the insult whole. Stepping back felt like a small rebellion, maybe insignificant to everyone else. But for me, it marked the beginning of a fracture inside. That night, A tiny seed of resistance took root. Maybe this time, I wouldn't just smooth over the pain and pretend it didn't hurt. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Lois noticed my withdrawal immediately after the wedding, and she wasn't about to let it slide quietly. The next day, I overheard her whispering to Aunt June and a couple of cousins, painting me as too sensitive and always looking for drama. The words hung in the air like a poison mist I couldn't escape. What hurt most wasn't just her cruelty. It was how quickly the gossip spiraled. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly took Lois's side, questioning my intentions and motives as if I was some troublemaker invading their family circle. Their eyes, once indifferent, now sharpened with suspicion. My father, Mark, remained silent throughout, never once stepping in to defend me. His silence felt like a betrayal deep in my bones, an unspoken agreement to let me take the fall alone. Whenever I caught his gaze, he avoided mine, as if pretending I didn't exist would make the conflict disappear. It was agonizing, feeling abandoned by the one person I hoped would protect me. Lois's gaslighting attacks intensified. "You're imagining things," she said once, voice dripping with false concern. "You've always been too emotional, Kathleen. Why can't you just get along?" The words burrowed under my skin, making me question my own perceptions. Even Lisa, my sister, seemed to pull away, torn between what she wanted to believe and the reality I showed her. The isolation was suffocating. I found myself second-guessing every feeling, wondering if maybe I was overreacting or just too sensitive after all. But buried beneath the self-doubt was a stubborn spark of truth. I knew the situation was far more complicated than they wanted to admit. I was caught in a web of lies and manipulation, and the harder I struggled, the more tangled I became. Determined not to let this spiral silently consume me, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I arranged a family meeting with Mark and Lois, hoping that calm conversation could mend the growing rift. Sitting across from them at the kitchen table, I took a deep breath and laid out everything. The money I'd quietly contributed, the emotional toll I'd borne, and my simple desire to be treated with respect and fairness. "I just want to be acknowledged for what I've done," I said steadily, trying to hold on to the calm I desperately needed to keep. I wasn't asking for more than what was due. I only wanted to belong. But Lois's response cut deeper than I expected. Her eyes welled with tears as she painted herself the victim, voice trembling with practiced fragility. "I've sacrificed so much for this family," she whispered, pushing back against my words with all the theatrics of a seasoned actor. She insinuated I was the one trying to divide everyone, even threatening to cut me off entirely if I pushed too hard. Mark nodded silently beside her, his eyes downcast, refusing to back me up or challenge her. The mediator, my cousin James, who I had hoped would be neutral, sided with Lois instead. "Families have complicated histories," he said, sounding more like a judge than a cousin. "Maybe Kathleen needs to be less sensitive." The words stung, a verdict wrapped in pity and dismissal. I left that meeting feeling smaller than before, the fragile hope I carried crushed under the weight of their rejection. Yet, despite the pain, I clung to the belief that things could change, that peace wasn't out of reach. I wasn't vengeful. I just wanted to feel like I belonged in the family I'd always supported. The next blow came public, and it hit with a brutal force I hadn't anticipated. At a community fundraiser where I was volunteering alongside colleagues and neighbors, Lois seized her opportunity to humiliate me in front of everyone. Her voice sliced through the chatter as she said, "Kathleen's always been the charity case, relying on others to cover her mess." The room fell into murmurs of surprise and awkward glances. My face flushed crimson, burning with shame and disbelief. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues and, worse, my husband Daniel on me. The sting of humiliation was sharp, dragging my confidence through the mud. This wasn't just emotional torment anymore. It threatened my professional reputation and strained my marriage. Later that evening, Daniel confronted Lois quietly, his voice low but firm. "This is beyond cruel. You're attacking someone who's given everything." Lois just smirked, shrugging as if she had already won some twisted game. The coldness in her eyes told me this was no accident. It was a calculated assault designed to break me down publicly and assert her control. The humiliation cut deeper than ever, but rather than shatter me, it steeled my resolve. I realized this war wasn't about money or recognition anymore. It was about survival, and I had to be ready. In a final act of goodwill, I decided to extend an olive branch, hoping to ease the mounting tension. I offered to help Lois with her bills, knowing she was struggling financially, and said plainly, "I want us to move forward. Let's work together." For a brief moment, she accepted, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. But as soon as I showed any vulnerability, she dismissed me again behind my back, calling me pathetic in front of her sons. When I confronted her about this, the mask slipped, and she threatened to expose personal details about me if I pushed further. That was the line she crossed. For the first time, anger and hurt collided loudly inside me, and I said aloud, "I've done everything I could. This ends now." I was vulnerable, and she crushed that openness without hesitation. The betrayal was complete, and forgiveness felt impossible. But even in that darkest moment, I knew I had to hold my head high. Lois might have shattered my trust, but she would never break my spirit. Not yet. After my last desperate attempt to bridge the widening gap, the fallout was brutal. Lois wasted no time spinning her venomous lies, whispering to anyone who would listen that I was a manipulative attention seeker, a drama queen desperate for sympathy. The worst part wasn't just her words. It was how quickly they took root. Family members who had once stood by me began to pull back, their eyes wary and cold. Some avoided my calls altogether, as if contact with me might stir trouble they didn't want to face. The crushing isolation was suffocating. I could almost feel the weight of invisible walls closing in around me, shutting me out of the family I had tried so hard to hold together. My father's silence was the deepest wound of all. When I looked to him for protection, for even a sliver of support, he turned away. His quiet inaction felt like a deliberate betrayal, a choice to let Lois's poison spread unchecked. It was as if he had built a fortress behind which he hid, refusing to defend me or acknowledge the damage being done. I caught him once in the kitchen, his eyes flickering with guilt or maybe exhaustion, but he said nothing. That silence echoed louder than any argument. I was left wondering if he had given up on me, or perhaps on the family itself. Daniel was the only light cutting through that fog of despair. His steady presence was a lifeline, the one person who saw me clearly and refused to abandon me. Still, even his reassurance couldn't fully erase the gnawing doubt that had taken root inside me. Was I the problem? Had I misread every moment, every glance, every cold comment? The exhaustion was relentless, dragging me down into a pit where hope had all but vanished. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the tired woman staring back, her eyes dull, her smile gone, replaced by a hollow confusion that left me grasping for any sign of strength. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, a strange clarity began to emerge. It was cold, unyielding, a mental sharpness cutting through the haze of hurt and self-doubt. I realized that if I didn't take control, I would lose everything I had fought for: my dignity, my future, maybe even my identity. The kindness and patience I had clung to were no longer enough. Something inside me hardened, a quiet promise forming like ice in my veins. I wouldn't be swallowed whole by this family's cruelty. I couldn't afford to be invisible any longer. It was time to fight, not with anger or desperation, but with a clear-eyed purpose I hadn't known I possessed. Then came the day that shattered what little peace I'd managed to cling to. Lois, with my father's passive blessing, orchestrated a move so ruthless it left me breathless. Without a word of warning, the ownership of the family home, the place I had sacrificed so much to keep, was transferred to her biological sons. My stepbrothers, the favorites, had been handed the keys to everything Grandpa had left behind. The documents were signed, sealed, and delivered without my knowledge, bypassing me completely. The house, once legally mine in part, was now theirs. I wasn't just hurt. I was blindsided in a way that felt like a gut punch to my very soul. Sitting in the sterile conference room, the air thick with tension, I stared blankly at the papers on the table. Mark, our family lawyer, sat nearby, his expression unreadable. while Lois wore a smug smile that cut deeper than any words. The facts were undeniable. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a cold, calculated theft carried out with legal backing and my father's quiet consent. I felt numb, my chest tightening as the reality sunk in. The dream of fairness, of belonging, dissolved like smoke in the air. In that moment, the veil lifted completely. I saw the full shape of their greed, their cruelty, and the extent of my father's cowardice. Years of invisible sacrifices, all ignored. Hope died hard that day, replaced by a freezing, unbreakable resolve. Something inside me shifted irrevocably. No longer the hopeful daughter clinging to fragile dreams. I was a woman awakened, armed with undeniable truth, and a secret weapon I had kept hidden far too long. The inheritance documents safe in my deposit box were no longer distant promises. They were my lifeline, my shield, and my sword. This was no longer about family or forgiveness. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The moment had passed for soft words or gentle hopes. The game had changed, and I was ready to play by new rules. That night, alone in the quiet of my apartment, the weight of betrayal pressed down harder than ever. I sat curled on the worn couch, the hum of the city outside a dull backdrop to the storm inside. Memories flooded in. Every laugh I'd paid for, every meal I'd quietly covered, every silence where I was dismissed like a ghost. The pain was raw, but beneath it, anger ignited like a spark in dry tinder. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. Furious that I had been invisible, unacknowledged, and taken for granted for years. Furious that I had blinded myself to the pattern of cold neglect and greed that had swallowed my family whole. I whispered to myself, barely audible, never again. The words felt like a vow, searing deep into my bones. The anger was sharp but focused, not wild or destructive. It transformed the grief into something I could wield, a fierce determination to protect myself and claim what was mine. For the first time, I considered the inheritance documents I'd kept locked away. They were proof, undeniable and powerful, and I realized I wasn't powerless after all. The quiet provider, the overlooked stepdaughter, was ready to become the architect of her own fate. A new chapter was beginning, fueled by pain but driven by purpose. The next morning, I sat down with Daniel, the one person who had stood by me through every storm. I laid everything bare. The betrayal, the hidden debts, the theft of what should have been mine. His eyes didn't waver as I spoke, steady and resolute. "It's time," I said quietly, the words feeling like a release. "I can't let this go on." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight, a solemn promise in his gaze. "I'm with you," he said simply. It was a quiet alliance, but it meant everything. Together, we began to map out a plan. The first step was clear. A full financial audit to document every dollar I had poured into the family's survival, every sacrifice hidden beneath layers of silence. We would uncover the truth in black and white, bank statements, receipts, transfers, and expose the fraud at its core. The target was clear: Lois, backed by Mark's passive complicity. We would consult a lawyer, prepare for court if necessary. The fight was no longer personal. It was about justice and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Inside, I felt something shift, a transformation from victim to strategist. The fight was no longer fueled by desperation, but by a cold, measured resolve. I was no longer the silent ghost drifting through their lives. The quiet countdown to confrontation had begun. Every step, every move would be deliberate, precise. The family that had tried to erase me was about to learn that I was far stronger than they ever imagined. As I sat surrounded by piles of bank statements, receipts, and old emails, the cold weight of realization settled deep in my chest. Every mortgage payment I'd quietly covered, every utility bill that arrived on time because of me, every grocery run to feed Lois's boys without a single thank you. Each detail etched a painful tally of my invisible sacrifices. I'd been the family's silent backbone, the one who fixed Mark's truck without complaint, who slipped money into the household coffers like a ghost no one noticed, and yet, none of it had ever been acknowledged, not once. That sting of erasure burned sharper than I expected. Determined to turn this invisible ledger into something undeniable, I reached out to my accountant, someone I trusted implicitly. Over long calls and carefully scheduled meetings, we pieced together a sprawling spreadsheet, $230,000 in unrecognized contributions spread across years. Each entry felt like a small victory, a concrete slap to the apathy I'd endured. My lawyer, equally meticulous, pointed out loopholes in the house transfer documents. Mark had signed off on critical papers without the faintest clue of their implications. His passivity was a vulnerability I realized I could wield. I also discovered hidden debts that Lois had kept secret, more than $100,000 in liabilities buried beneath layers of silence. The more I dug, the clearer the power imbalance became. Lois's texts echoed in my mind, her repeated insistence to just let it go, the pressure to abandon my claims and accept her narrative. Emails exposed her financial manipulations, painstakingly documented now. The family's foundations, once seemingly solid, were riddled with cracks I had the tools to expose. The truth was undeniable. They depended on me far more than I ever depended on them. The scales had been tipped for too long, and for the first time, I was ready to tip them back. Late into the night, as the city's hum filtered through my window, I felt a strange surge of clarity beneath the exhaustion. This wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my place, my identity. I wasn't angry or bitter. I was resolute. This quiet inventory of debts and betrayals was the blueprint for a reckoning I was prepared to face, no matter the cost. I could almost hear the shift in the air, the subtle tightening of control that would soon ripple through the family's carefully maintained facade. I was no longer invisible. To cement my position, I updated my passwords on every financial account tied to the family's holdings. No more easy access for Lois or anyone else. I notified my lawyer to prepare the necessary legal paperwork. Everything needed to align perfectly when the time came to confront them. Yet outside, I wore my usual mask. At family dinners and gatherings, I was the calm, composed Kathleen everyone expected, speaking little but watching closely. Lois acted as if nothing had changed, her usual dismissive smirk never slipping. Mark nodded along silently, oblivious or indifferent. The paradox was suffocating. The quiet before the storm was so still, so perfectly normal, that no one suspected the undercurrents swirling beneath. The house was filled with the same laughter, the same hollow conversations, yet I felt like a shadow moving through a living room of enemies. Each evening, I pored over my evidence again, rehearsing arguments with Daniel, calibrating my words and emotions. The mental preparation was exhausting, but I knew the confrontation would be more than a verbal sparring match. It would shake the fragile alliances in the family to their core. Still, the final key piece eluded me. A nagging sense of incompletion gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Everything felt poised, but not quite ready. I needed one more thread to unravel the entire scheme. Proof that would not just challenge Lois's claims, but shatter the illusion that I was the outsider here. The calm in my chest was deceptive, a fragile surface masking a storm-gathering strength. I forced myself to breathe, to trust in the process. The silence was only temporary. Then, as I sifted through old bank statements one sleepless night, a pattern jumped out. Transfers between Lois and Lisa, my own sister, not a few $100s, but over $50,000 quietly funneled away over 2 years. My heart dropped like a stone in my stomach. I had to know more. Digging deeper, I uncovered a secret agreement. Lois and Lisa had been working in tandem to redirect Grandpa's inheritance, deliberately cutting me out of the picture altogether. The blood drained from my face as I confronted the treachery I never expected. I arranged a private meeting with Lisa, the air thick with tension. At first, she denied everything, her voice shaky but defiant. Then, with tears spilling down her cheeks, she confessed. Lois had convinced her to side with the real kids, her biological sons, promising financial support, a better future if she played along. Betrayal sliced sharper than I could have imagined. Worse still, my father knew and chose silence, cloaking his cowardice in passive denial. The family I thought I could count on felt like a house of cards collapsing all at once. The facade crumbled in that moment. This was no longer just a conflict over money or respect. It was a conspiracy that poisoned every relationship I'd held dear. The double betrayal ripped open wounds I thought were healing, leaving me raw and exposed. Yet beneath the shock, a deeper fire ignited. This wasn't just about reclaiming an inheritance anymore. It was about exposing the rot at the family's core, about standing unflinchingly against a conspiracy that threatened to erase me completely. Armed now not only with financial proof, but with irrefutable evidence of collusion, I felt a grim satisfaction. For the first time, I held the moral and legal upper hand. The court date was no longer just a fight for fairness. It was a fight for truth, for justice, for my very identity. The weight of years of neglect and lies pressed down, but instead of crushing me, it fueled a fierce resolve that hardened every fiber of my being. This was no longer a private sorrow, but a public reckoning waiting to unfold. The first step in turning this new power into action was to cut off the lifelines I'd been quietly maintaining. Without a word, I stopped all mortgage payments and ceased covering utility bills. Within weeks, the house began receiving overdue notices, utility companies leaving stern warnings on the door. Lois's face remained a mask of ignorance, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she connected the dots. The slow unraveling of her control had begun, and I was the unseen hand pulling the strings. I filed legal notices to freeze the house transfer, halting the transaction that had once seemed irreversible. Letters from my lawyer arrived at Mark's office, demanding explanations and restitution. I felt a quiet satisfaction watching the first tremors ripple through their carefully constructed world. At family gatherings, I maintained a cool detachment, engaging with Lois only in the most necessary pleasantries. Daniel observed this change with a mixture of awe and respect. "You're not the same Kathleen anymore," he said quietly one evening, the words carrying a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged. Lois's confident veneer began to crack as the consequences mounted. Her sons grumbled about tightening finances, sensing the shifts but powerless to stop them. Mark grew uneasy, his silence betraying discomfort. The game was underway, quiet, calculated, and relentless. I felt the slow but steady momentum build inside me, a force that no amount of denial or manipulation could stop. The family that once ignored and dismissed me now faced the first undeniable signs of a reckoning they hadn't seen coming. The chessboard was set, and every move was mine to command. The day of the family meeting arrived with a heavy silence hanging over the room. The lawyer's office was stark, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly as relatives shuffled in, whispering nervously among themselves. I could feel their eyes on me, the dismissed stepdaughter who had suddenly found her voice. When the lawyer gave me the floor, I stood up with steady hands, holding the thick folder that contained every spreadsheet, every bank statement, every piece of irrefutable evidence I had spent months assembling. "This is the truth about who paid for everything," I began, my voice clear and unshakable. $230,000 from me, unacknowledged and stolen. Lois's face drained of color, her usual smugness replaced by a flicker of panic. She opened her mouth, stammering, but no words came out that could deny the paper trail laid bare in front of everyone. The room went still as I pressed play on the recordings I had gathered, the whispered conversations between her and Lisa, plotting how to exclude me, how to funnel my rightful inheritance away. Lisa's voice cracked with guilt in the background, while Lois's cold determination was palpable. Mark sat silently beside them, eyes downcast, the weight of his guilt pressing heavily on him. I looked around the room, meeting the stunned gazes of relatives who had long accepted Lois's manipulations as truth. "The house is legally in my name," I declared, "and the transfer was fraudulent. This family can no longer operate on lies and silence." The air thickened with tension, whispers rippling like waves. Some relatives nodded subtly in support. Others avoided my gaze as if ashamed. The lawyer nodded gravely. I set my boundaries firmly. There will be no more financial support without transparency. No more silence. Full accountability starts now. For the first time, the power had shifted. I was no longer invisible. I held my head high, calm and in control. Justice was served and dignity restored. The aftermath was immediate. Lois's world began to unravel in ways I had only hoped for. Creditors' calls flooded in, their voices sharp and insistent. Overdue bills, some hidden from view until now, surfaced like ghosts from the past. Her sons complained bitterly about the tightening grip on their finances. Lois's attempts to pressure me through phone calls and increasingly desperate messages were met with cold refusals. "I'm not the person you think I am anymore, Lois," I said once, voice firm over the phone. "I'm done with the lies." Lois and Lisa reached out with frantic apologies, promises to fix what they'd broken, but I held my ground, my boundaries clear and unyielding. Mark, who had stood so silently before, began questioning his own complicity, expressing regret in hushed conversations I only half acknowledged. Some extended family members, stunned by the revelations, whispered their shock. Lois's iron grip on the family was cracking, her control slipping through trembling fingers. The house transfer was reversed, my legal standing confirmed. I watched quietly from the sidelines, satisfaction warming me but no trace of cruelty. It was justice, not vengeance. As Lois's desperation grew, so did her tactics. Threats of legal action, accusations of defamation, and public pleas casting herself as the victim flooded my inbox. She tried to rally relatives to her side, pushing a narrative that I was tearing the family apart. "You're ruining this family," one cousin said after a tense call. But I was prepared. My lawyer deftly handled every legal challenge, and Daniel's quiet strength stood behind me like an unbreakable shield. I refused to let myself be swayed by emotional blackmail or false narratives. Some family members, shaken by the truth, reached out with heartfelt apologies for doubting me. I accepted some gestures but made it clear. Trust must be rebuilt on respect and truth, not silence and deceit. Lois's manipulation unraveled in full view. Her isolation became palpable, her desperate attempts to regain control growing more frantic and futile. The family fractures deepened, and the battle I'd feared was finally over. She lost. I didn't celebrate loudly. There was no joy in her downfall, but I felt an unshakable peace. The fight had been necessary, but the hard part was now behind me. 6 months later, life feels lighter, quieter. The house is mine, legally and emotionally, a symbol not just of inheritance, but of my worth and strength. Daniel and I have grown closer, our bond forged through the fires of this journey. Family gatherings are smaller now, stripped of the old tensions and false pleasantries. My contact with Lois and Lisa is limited, strictly on my terms, with clear boundaries that protect my peace. Mark has started therapy, confronting his passivity and the role he played. But I've chosen to keep some distance, focusing on healing rather than full reconciliation. I don't miss the old dynamics, the silences that cut deeper than any words, the dismissals that made me invisible, the betrayals that broke trust. What I have now is autonomy, respect, and the hard-earned knowledge that my worth was never tied to family approval. It's rooted in the integrity and strength I found within myself. The road was painful, yes, but it led me to freedom, a freedom I never expected, but now cherish above all else. Looking out my window at the calm city skyline, I realize this chapter has closed, and a new one, full of hope and quiet dignity, has just begun.